I woke up groggy, my mouth still numb from the dentist, but something felt wrong. Not loud, not obvious, just wrong enough to make my chest tighten. My late husband's jewelry chest. Robert's was slightly crooked on the dresser. I hadn't touched it in months. My hands trembled as I opened it. And that's when I saw it. Empty slots. Missing pieces, and the one box I would have sworn no one knew about, gone. Because that little blue velvet box didn't just hold a ring. It held something my daughter was never supposed to find. If you've ever had a feeling like this, like something inside your own home shifted when you weren't looking, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read every comment, and if this story already makes your heart uneasy, you might want to stay with me. My name is Donna Bryant. I'm 67 years old, and until recently, I believed I understood the shape of my life. I live in Savannah, Georgia, in the same white-paneled house my husband Robert and I bought when we were barely older than our daughter is now. The front porch still creaks in the same places it did 40 years ago. The magnolia tree out back still blooms too early every spring. And inside these walls, there are pieces of a life that no longer exists. His books, his tools, the quiet rhythm of his footsteps that I still sometimes think I hear when the house settles at night. Robert passed away 3 years ago. Heart failure, quick, the doctors said, as if that made it easier. As if quick erased the decades of habit, the empty chair at the table, the way your body still turns to speak to someone who isn't there anymore. After he died, everything softened and sharpened at the same time. I cried less than people expected, but I felt more than I knew how to carry. Grief does that. It doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like holding on to things, objects, routines, even jewelry, because they are the last proof that your life was once shared. That jewelry chest on my dresser, Robert gave it to me on our 25th anniversary. Cherry wood, hand-carved with tiny brass hinges that always caught the light just right in the morning. It wasn't expensive. That wasn't his way. But it was thoughtful. He used to say, I'd rather give you something that means something than something that impresses someone. I kept everything in there, not because of the value, but because of the stories. But I suppose that's the difference between me and my daughter. Heather Collins is 42. She used to be soft in ways I don't know how to explain anymore. When she was little, she would sit on the kitchen counter and watch me cook, asking questions about everything: why butter melted the way it did, why the sky looked pink at sunset, why her father always kissed me on the forehead before leaving for work. Somewhere along the way, those questions turned into calculations. Heather has always been practical. That's what she calls it, practical, efficient. She doesn't like things that just sit there. She doesn't understand why I kept Robert's old watch even after it stopped ticking, or why I still fold his flannel shirts and keep them in the closet like he might come back for them. And she definitely never understood my jewelry. Mom, this is money just sitting in boxes, she told me once, standing in my bedroom with her arms crossed, looking at the open chest like it was a waste instead of a memory. You could sell half of this and fix up the house, or invest it, or at least do something with it. I remember smiling politely and closing the lid. I already did something with it, I said. I kept it. She didn't like that answer. About 6 months ago, Heather moved back in. She said it was temporary, just until she got back on her feet after the divorce. She brought my grandson, Ethan, with her. 16 years old, quiet, always watching more than he speaks. He reminds me of Robert in that way. At first, I was grateful. The house felt less empty with them here. There were sounds again, footsteps, doors opening and closing, the hum of the television in the evenings. Ethan would sit with me sometimes, asking about his grandfather, about what Savannah used to be like, before everything became faster and louder. But Heather brought something else into the house. Tension. It wasn't obvious at first, just small things. The way she sighed when I repeated a story. The way she corrected me in front of Ethan when I forgot a date or misplaced my glasses. The way she began asking questions not about how I felt, but about what I had. How much is the house worth? Now, Mom, do you have all your accounts organized? Have you thought about what happens if you need help later? At first, I thought it was concern, maybe even love in a practical form I didn't recognize. But over time, the questions became suggestions, and the suggestions became pressure. "You shouldn't be handling everything alone anymore," she told me one evening, standing in the doorway of the kitchen while I washed dishes. "It's not safe. I've been handling things alone for 3 years," I replied gently. "I think I'm managing." She didn't argue. Not directly. She just gave me that look, the one that says, "You don't know what you don't know." The night before I found the jewelry missing, she brought me a cup of tea. "You look tired," she said, setting it down beside me in the living room. "You haven't been sleeping well." "I'm fine," I told her. But she shook her head. "No, you're not. You keep waking up in the middle of the night. I hear you walking around." I hesitated. That part was true. "Just take one," she said, holding out a small white pill. "It's mild. My doctor gave them to me when everything was falling apart last year. It'll help you rest." I should have said no. I don't usually take medication unless I absolutely have to. Robert used to joke that I trusted herbal tea more than modern medicine. But that night, I was tired. Not just physically. Tired in a way that comes from carrying too much for too long. So I took it. I remember lying down, the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. I remember thinking how quiet the house felt, even with Heather and Ethan in it. And then, nothing. No dreams. No waking up in the night. No half-conscious awareness of the world around me. Just a heavy, complete sleep that swallowed everything. When I woke up the next morning, the sunlight was already too bright. Later than I usually slept, my mouth felt dry. My head felt thick like I'd been underwater. And now, standing in front of that jewelry chest, staring at the empty spaces where pieces of my life used to be, I realized something that made my stomach turn. That sleep hadn't just been rest. It had been opportunity. I didn't call out for Heather. I didn't ask a single question. Instead, I closed the lid slowly, pressing my hand against the smooth wood to steady myself. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the faint sounds of movement downstairs, the clink of a coffee mug, the low murmur of the television. Normal sounds, carefully arranged normalcy. Then I walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. 67 years old, not fragile, not confused, and not nearly as unaware as my daughter seemed to think. By the time I made my way downstairs, Heather was already at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. Ethan sat at the table, half-focused on a bowl of cereal, his eyes flicking up when I entered. "Morning, Mom," Heather said casually, not even looking up. "Sleep okay?" I studied her face. Calm, relaxed, too relaxed. "Better than usual," I replied. She smiled faintly. "Told you that would help." I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands steady now, deliberately steady. "Funny thing," I added, lightly turning toward her. "I thought I heard something in the night." That got her attention. She glanced up. "Like what I don't know," I said with a small shrug. "Maybe I was dreaming. You didn't hear anything, did you?" A pause. Just a second too long. "No," she said a little too quickly. "Nothing." I slept straight through. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of coffee. Must have been nothing then. But as I sat down across from Ethan, I caught the way his eyes dropped to his bowl, the way his shoulders tightened just slightly. And in that moment, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. My daughter had taken the jewelry, and whatever she thought she had found inside that missing blue velvet box, she hadn't understood it at all. I waited until Heather left the kitchen before I went back upstairs. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I needed to be sure of what I already knew. There's a difference between suspicion and certainty. Suspicion can be explained away. It can be softened, denied, even forgiven. But certainty settles in your bones. It changes how you stand, how you breathe, how you look at someone you thought you knew. And I needed that certainty before I said a single word. The house was quiet again, the morning light stretching across the hallway floor in long, pale lines. I walked slowly, deliberately, as if the walls themselves might be watching, as if something fragile still existed that I could break just by moving too quickly. When I reached my bedroom, I closed the door behind me. Then I went straight to the jewelry chest. I opened it this time without hesitation. Empty. Not completely, but enough. The emerald anniversary ring Robert gave me on our 40th year was gone. I used to wear it only on Sundays when the light hit it just right through the church windows. Gone. My mother's pearl brooch, the one she wore the day she met my father, gone. 2 gold bracelets Robert picked out himself during a trip we took to Charleston, back when we still believed we had all the time in the world. Gone. Each missing piece wasn't just an object, it was a moment, a memory, a version of my life that no longer existed anywhere except in that box, except now, not even there. But none of those absences stopped my breath the way the last one did. The blue velvet ring box. I stared at the empty slot where it used to sit, tucked neatly in the corner like it always had been, smaller than the others, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know better, to anyone who hadn't been there the night Robert pressed it into my hand. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, the chest still open in front of me, and just like that, the memory came back. It had been late. Rain tapping softly against the windows. Robert had that look on his face, the one he got when he had already made a decision and was just waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. "Donna," he said, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, holding that little blue box between his fingers. I remember smiling. "You know you don't have to buy me anything just to talk to me." It's not that he said quietly. Something in his voice made me sit up straighter. He came over, sat beside me, and placed the box in my lap. "Keep this," he said, "and don't throw it away. Ever." I frowned slightly. Why would I throw it away? Just promise me, he insisted, so I did. I promised. At the time, I thought it was sentimental, maybe even a little unnecessary. But Robert was like that sometimes, careful with things that didn't always seem important in the moment. It wasn't until years later after he passed that I discovered the truth. I had been cleaning out the chest, reorganizing things the way I used to before life became quieter. When I picked up the blue box, something felt off. The weight. It was heavier than it should have been for something so small. Curious, I ran my fingers along the inside, pressing gently against the satin lining. And that's when I felt it. A slight give, a hidden seam. My hands had trembled as I carefully lifted the lining just enough to reveal what was underneath. A folded piece of paper, small, neatly tucked, hidden so well that no one would ever find it unless they were looking, unless they knew. I remember sitting there for a long time, staring at that paper, debating whether I should open it. It felt private. Not like a gift, not like something meant to be discovered casually. But in the end, I unfolded it. And what I read, I never told anyone. Not Heather, not even myself out loud. I just folded it back, placed it exactly where I found it, and closed the box. Some things I believed were meant to stay quiet until the right moment. Now standing in my bedroom years later, staring at the empty space where that box used to be, I felt a chill move through me that had nothing to do with the morning air. Heather had taken it. Not just the jewelry, that box, that note. But here's the thing. Heather didn't know about the hidden compartment. I had never told her. I had never even hinted. To her, that blue velvet box was just that, a box. Maybe old, maybe sentimental, but nothing more. Unless she had gone looking. The thoughts settled slowly, heavily, like something sinking to the bottom of deep water. I closed the chest again, this time more carefully. Then I stood up and walked back downstairs. Heather was still in the kitchen, but now she was moving around, rinsing her coffee mug, humming softly to herself like everything in the world was exactly as it should be. Ethan was gone, probably upstairs getting ready for school. I leaned lightly against the doorway, watching her for a moment. "Did you go out this morning?" I asked casually. She glanced over her shoulder. "Me no." "Why?" I shrugged. "Just wondering. I thought I heard the front door earlier." She turned back to the sink. "You probably dreamed it. You were out pretty hard last night." Out pretty hard. The words landed heavier than they should have. "I guess so," I said quietly. I walked into the kitchen, taking my time, letting the silence stretch just enough to feel uncomfortable. "You know," I added, opening the fridge as if I were looking for something. "I was thinking of taking some things into town today. Get them cleaned, maybe appraised." That got her attention. "What things?" she asked too quickly. I closed the fridge and turned toward her. "My jewelry," I said simply. For a fraction of a second, her face changed, not dramatically, not enough that someone else might notice. But I saw it. The flicker, the calculation, then it was gone. "Oh," she said, forcing a small smile. "That's probably a good idea, like I've been saying." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I replied. "You have been saying that." She dried her hands on a towel, avoiding my eyes now. "Let me know if you want help," she added. "I know a few places that give better prices." "I'm sure you do," I said softly. The words hung between us for a moment, heavier than either of us acknowledged. Then Ethan came down the stairs, breaking the tension without even realizing it. "Hey, Grandma," he said, grabbing his backpack. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied, smiling at him. But as he moved past his mother, I caught the way his eyes flicked toward her, and then toward me, and then away again. There was something there, something unspoken, something he was holding on to, and in that moment my certainty deepened into something colder. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't desperation in a single moment. This was planned, carefully, quietly, while I slept. I watched Heather as she picked up her phone again, her fingers moving quickly across the screen, her expression calm, controlled. Too controlled. And as I stood there in my own kitchen in the house I had built my entire life inside, I realized something else. Heather hadn't just taken what she thought had value. She had gone looking for something hidden, something she believed would give her more than money, and whatever she thought she had found in that box, she was wrong. She had missed the most important part. Because Robert didn't hide that note to be found easily, and he certainly didn't hide it to be understood by someone who had to steal to get to it. I didn't confront Heather that day, or the next, or even the day after that. Some people might think that makes me weak, that I should have marched straight into the kitchen, held up the empty jewelry chest, and demanded answers. But confrontation, when it comes too early, gives the other person time to adjust their story, to smooth out the edges, to turn your certainty back into doubt. No. If Heather had taken those pieces, and I knew she had, then she had already chosen her version of the truth. Now I needed to understand it. The house moved around me like it always did. Mornings with coffee and quiet conversation, evenings with the television humming low in the background. The illusion of normalcy settled back into place so easily, it almost made me question myself. Almost, but not quite. Because every time I passed my bedroom, I felt it again. That hollow space, that absence, like something had been taken, not just from the dresser, but from the structure of the house itself. And every time Heather smiled at me too bright, too careful, I felt something else. Distance. Not the kind that comes from disagreement, the kind that comes from someone standing on the other side of a line they chose to cross. On the third day, I decided to leave the house. "I'm going into town," I said casually, picking up my purse by the door. Heather looked up from the couch. "For what? Just errands," I replied. "I won't be long." She hesitated just for a second. "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked. "I could drive." I shook my head gently. "I'm perfectly capable of driving myself." Another flicker, another calculation. Then she smiled. "Of course you are." I nodded, stepping outside into the soft Georgia heat. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with humidity, and something else I couldn't quite name. Freedom, maybe, or the first real step toward it. Savannah hadn't changed much in the years I'd lived here. The same narrow streets, the same old buildings with their fading paint and stubborn charm. Places like this hold on to their past. They don't let it slip away easily. I wondered as I drove if people were the same, or if some of us learned how to let go of things that should have stayed. My first stop was a small jewelry shop on Abercorn Street, not one of the bigger polished places with bright lights and glass displays, but a quieter shop, the kind Robert used to prefer, the kind where the owner knew your name, or at least remembered your face. A small bell chimed as I stepped inside. "Good morning," a voice called from behind the counter. I smiled politely. "Good morning." The man behind the counter was younger than I expected, but attentive. Careful in the way he watched me, like he understood that people didn't walk into places like this without a reason. "How can I help you?" he asked. I reached into my purse, pulling out Robert's old watch, the one I had chosen to bring as an excuse. I was wondering if you could take a look at this, I said. It hasn't been working for a while. He nodded, taking it gently, examining it under the light. It's a nice piece, he said. Older but well made. My husband's, I replied. He looked up briefly, something softer crossing his face. I can take a look at it. Might just need cleaning or a small repair. That would be lovely, I said. I let the conversation drift for a moment, asked a few harmless questions, let him explain what he saw, what he could do, and then casually, I shifted. You must see a lot of different pieces come through here, I said. People selling, buying, trading. He nodded. All the time. Anyone come in recently with older items, I asked lightly. Family jewelry, maybe. He hesitated just slightly. Sometimes, he said carefully, Why do you ask? I smiled just enough to keep it polite. I was thinking of bringing some things in, I said. But I wanted to get a sense of what's common, what people are looking for. He relaxed a little at that. Well, he said there's always interest in vintage pieces, especially if they're well kept. I nodded, thanking him, letting the conversation end there. He didn't know anything. Or if he did, he wasn't willing to say. Either way, I wasn't surprised. Heather wouldn't go somewhere obvious. She would go somewhere quicker, somewhere less careful. My second stop was further down the road, a place Robert would never have liked. No charm, no quiet understanding, just bright lights, security cameras, and a sign in the window that read, "We buy gold cash today." I sat in the car for a moment before going in, not because I was afraid, but because I knew somehow that this was where things would stop being uncertain, where suspicion would become fact. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of metal and something sharper like desperation that had settled into the walls. Behind the counter stood an older man, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. "Help you?" he asked. I smiled politely. "I hope so." I stepped closer, resting my hands lightly on the counter. "I was wondering if you might have seen something recently," I said. "A few pieces, family items." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied me. Not my clothes, not my purse, my face, as if he were measuring something. "What kind of pieces?" he asked finally. I took a slow breath. "An emerald ring," I said, "gold bracelets, a pearl brooch." The silence stretched. Then something shifted. It was subtle, but unmistakable. His expression didn't change completely, but it tightened. Just enough to tell me everything I needed to know. "I see a lot of things," he said carefully. "I'm sure you do," I replied softly. Another pause. And then almost reluctantly, he leaned forward slightly. "You looking to buy them back?" he asked. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. I already had my answer. "Yes," I said quietly, "if they've been sold." He studied me again, longer this time. Then he exhaled slowly. "Woman came in this morning," he said. Mid-40s. Seemed in a hurry. Had pieces like that. My fingers tightened slightly against the counter, but my voice stayed steady. "Did she say where they came from?" He shook his head. "They never do. Of course they didn't." "Did she bring anything else?" I asked. He hesitated, and that hesitation, that was the moment everything changed. "She had a small box," he said finally. Blue velvet, looked old. My breath caught, but only for a second. "What did she do with it?" I asked. "She didn't sell it," he said. "Not at first." I frowned slightly. "Why not?" He shrugged. Said it wasn't worth anything. No stone inside, just the box. I swallowed. And then he leaned back, crossing his arms. "She came back for it," he said, not long after. Asked a few questions. "What kind of questions?" His eyes narrowed slightly, about hidden compartments. The words hit harder than anything else he had said, not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I had already begun to fear. Heather hadn't just taken the jewelry. She had gone looking, searching, digging for something she believed was there, something she thought she could use. I nodded slowly, forcing my expression to remain calm. "Thank you," I said. He didn't respond right away, just watched me as I turned to leave, and as I stepped back out into the savannah heat, the weight of everything settled fully into place. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a moment of weakness. Heather knew exactly what she was doing, and whatever she thought she had found inside that box, she was already building something on top of it. Something bigger than stolen jewelry. Something far more dangerous. And for the first time since I opened that empty chest, I wasn't just hurt. I was afraid. I sat in my car for a long time after leaving the pawn shop. The engine was still running. The air conditioning humming softly, but I didn't drive. I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead as people moved in and out of the store behind me. A woman laughing into her phone. A man counting bills before stepping inside. A young couple arguing quietly over something that probably felt like the end of the world to them. Life continuing as if nothing had shifted. But for me, everything had. Because now I knew. Not suspected, not feared, not imagined. Knew. Heather had taken the jewelry, she had sold it. And she had gone back specifically for that blue velvet box. Not because it had value, but because she believed it held something. Something hidden. Something worth more than gold. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that truth settle into something steady. Then I reached for my phone. My first instinct was to call her, to demand answers, to force her into a corner where she had to admit what she'd done. But instinct isn't always wisdom, and something deeper, something quieter, colder, held me back. Because the moment I confronted her, everything would change. She would deny it, or twist it, or cry, or turn it into something else entirely. And if there was one thing I had learned in the last 3 years, it was that grief makes you vulnerable. But awareness makes you dangerous. So instead of calling Heather, I called someone else. Bryant Residence, I murmured softly, as if I were answering my own phone out of habit. Then I stopped myself exhaling. No, not that. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't touched in years. Patricia Langford, Robert's attorney. My finger hovered over the screen for a second before I pressed call. The phone rang twice. Langford and Associates. A calm professional voice answered. How may I direct your call? Hello, I said, steadying my voice. My name is Donna Bryant. I'm calling regarding Robert Bryant's estate. There was a brief pause. Of course, Mrs. Bryant, the receptionist, replied. One moment, please. Soft music filled the line. I hadn't spoken to Patricia since the weeks after Robert passed. She had handled everything with quiet efficiency, explaining documents I barely understood at the time, guiding me through decisions I didn't feel ready to make. Back then, I had trusted her because Robert trusted her. Now, I needed to know what he had trusted her with. Donna Patricia's voice came through warm but sharp, like she remembered exactly who I was. Yes, I said softly. Hello, Patricia. It's been a while, she said. Are you all right? I hesitated. That question. It carried more weight than she probably intended. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted, silence then a shift in her tone. Tell me what's going on. I glanced back at the pawn shop, then out at the road ahead. My daughter. I began slowly. Heather? She's been staying with me. I remember Patricia said. Robert mentioned her. And your grandson, Ethan. Yes, I said. She moved back in after her divorce. And I took a breath. She took my jewelry, I said plainly, while I was asleep. Another pause. Longer this time. Are you certain, Patricia asked? Yes, have you confronted her? No. Good. The word surprised me. Good, I repeated. Yes, Patricia said firmly. Do not confront her yet. Something in her voice, calm, controlled, decisive, made my grip on the phone tighten. Patricia, I said quietly, there was something in one of the boxes. She didn't respond immediately. I think you know what I'm referring to, I added. Another pause. Then I was wondering when you would call, she said. The words sent a chill through me. You knew I asked. I knew Robert, she corrected gently, and I knew how he thought. I swallowed. The blue velvet box, I said. Yes, and the note inside it. Yes, she confirmed. I closed my eyes. So she has it now, I said, or at least, she had it long enough to look for something inside, and you believe she found it? Patricia asked. I don't know, I admitted, but she went back for the box. She asked about hidden compartments. That was enough. I could hear it in the silence that followed. Patricia exhaled slowly. Donna, she said, her tone shifting again, deeper, now more serious. I need you to come into my office. My heart tightened. Why? Because whatever your daughter thinks she found, Patricia said carefully, it's only part of the truth. A cold sensation spread through my chest. What does that mean? It means, she continued, that Robert anticipated this possibility. My fingers curled tighter around the phone. This possibility, I repeated. Yes, she said, betrayal tied to inheritance. The word betrayal landed harder than I expected, even though I had already felt it, even though I already knew it. Hearing it spoken out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. What did he do? I asked, my voice quieter now. Not over the phone, Patricia replied. This is something I need to explain to you in person. I hesitated. I don't want to make things worse, I said. You won't, she assured me, but you need to understand what's in place before your daughter takes another step. Another step. The words echoed in my mind. Heather wasn't done. This wasn't the end of her plan. It was the beginning. When can you come in? Patricia asked. I glanced at the time on the dashboard. I can be there in an hour. Good, she said. I'll clear my schedule. The call ended, leaving me sitting in silence once again. But this time, the silence felt different. Not empty. Charged. I started the car and pulled out into traffic, my movements automatic, my thoughts anything but. Robert had anticipated this. Not just the possibility of greed, but the possibility that it would come from within our own family, from our daughter. I thought back to that night again. The rain, the quiet way he handed me that box. Keep this, he had said, and don't throw it away. Not keep the ring, not keep the memory. The box. He hadn't been protecting a piece of jewelry. He had been protecting something else entirely, something he knew might one day be needed. And now? That moment had come. As I drove through the familiar streets of Savannah, past the same houses and trees and corners I had known for decades, everything felt slightly altered. Like I was seeing it all from a different angle, a clearer one. By the time I reached Patricia's office, a quiet brick building tucked between two larger ones downtown, I felt something I hadn't felt since this all began. Not fear, not confusion, focus. I parked the car and stepped out, smoothing my hands over my blouse as I walked toward the entrance. Inside, the air was cool, still deliberate, just like her. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile and directed me down the hall. Patricia was already waiting when I entered her office. She stood as I stepped inside, her expression serious but not unkind. "Donna," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I'm glad you came." I lowered myself into the chair across from her desk, my hands resting in my lap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached for a folder, thick, sealed, deliberate. "Before we begin," she said carefully, "I need you to understand something." I looked at her, my heart steady now. "Robert didn't just leave you an estate," she continued. "He left you protection." The words settled slowly, heavily. Protection from what I asked. Patricia met my eyes directly. From exactly what's happening now. And in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. Heather hadn't just made a mistake. She had stepped directly into something my husband had already prepared for. And whatever she thought she had gained from that blue velvet box, she was about to lose far more. Patricia didn't open the folder right away. Instead, she watched me, carefully, quietly, the way Robert used to when he was trying to decide how much truth I was ready to hear. "Before I explain anything," she said, folding her hands neatly on top of the desk, "I need to ask you something, Donna." I nodded. "Has Heather tried to get you to sign anything recently?" she asked. The question came faster than I expected. "Yes," I said slowly. "Not yet directly, but she's been leading toward it, talking about organizing things, simplifying." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "And has she mentioned your house specifically?" I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then I remembered the words I had overheard. "If the note says what I think the house is basically mine." "Yes," I said quietly. "She believes she has some kind of claim to it." Patricia exhaled, leaning back slightly in her chair. "Then we don't have much time," she said. A chill ran through me. "What does that mean?" "It means," she replied, reaching for the folder, "that your daughter has misunderstood something very important." She slid the folder across the desk toward me, but kept her hand resting on top of it, as if anchoring it in place. Robert came to me about 6 years before he passed. She began. He was healthy at the time, clear-minded, very deliberate. That sounded like him. He told me he wanted to restructure his estate, she continued. Not because he didn't trust you, quite the opposite. He trusted you completely. I swallowed, but he had concerns, she added. About Heather, I asked. Patricia didn't answer immediately. He didn't use that word, she said carefully. But yes, about her judgment, her priorities, and her relationship with money. That too sounded like him. He had seen patterns, Patricia continued. Small things at first, requests that turned into expectations, situations where financial pressure led to questionable decisions. I thought back years ago to the arguments I had brushed aside, the loans Robert had insisted we document, the quiet tension that would rise whenever Heather asked for help, and Robert didn't immediately say yes. He didn't want to punish her, Patricia said, but he did want to protect you. I leaned forward slightly. So what did he do? Patricia lifted her hand from the folder. Then she opened it. Inside were documents neatly organized, clipped together, stamped and signed in places that carried more weight than I fully understood. This, she said, turning the first page toward me, is a conditional trust. I frowned. Conditional yes, she said. It means that Heather's inheritance was never guaranteed. It was dependent on her behavior. My breath caught. What kind of behavior? Patricia met my eyes directly. Good faith, she said. Honesty. Respect toward you as the surviving spouse. No coercion, no manipulation, no attempts to access assets through deception. Each word felt like a quiet blow, and if she... I started, but couldn't quite finish. If she violates those conditions, Patricia said calmly, her share is forfeited. Silence filled the room. I stared down at the document, the words blurring slightly as my eyes tried to process what my mind already understood. Forfeited, I repeated. Yes, to who I asked. Patricia turned another page. The assets are redirected, she explained. Part goes into a protected education fund for Ethan. A small flicker of relief moved through me. And the rest, I asked. A charitable trust, she said. Specifically, a women's shelter Robert had been quietly supporting for years. I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course he had. That was Robert, always thinking beyond himself, beyond us even. But the house. I said, my voice softer now. What about the house? Patricia's expression didn't change. The house remains in your name, she said. Fully, completely. No transfer of ownership can occur without your direct informed consent. Relief washed through me, but it was complicated, because it came wrapped in something else. Understanding. Heather didn't know any of this. Or if she did, she didn't understand it. She thinks the note proves something, I said slowly, that Robert intended to leave the house to her. Patricia nodded. That's exactly what he expected she might think. A strange, almost bitter smile touched my lips. He knew her that well. He hoped he was wrong, Patricia said gently, but he prepared in case he wasn't. I looked back down at the documents, and the note I asked, the one in the box. Patricia reached for another paper. This is a copy, she said, sliding it toward me. I stared at it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Robert's, steady, clean, deliberate. The original, Patricia said, was meant to remain hidden unless someone went looking for it in the wrong way. I picked it up carefully, my fingers brushing over the familiar strokes of his pen. I read it once. I said quietly, years ago. Then I put it back, Patricia nodded. Then you already know, she said. I did, but hearing it now, in this room, with everything else laid bare, it felt different. He wrote it as a test, I said. Yes, Patricia confirmed. A trap, if necessary. I exhaled slowly. And now she's triggered it, I added. Patricia didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, she said. The words settled heavily between us. She took the jewelry, I said, sold it, and she's already talking about the house. Then we need to document everything, Patricia replied immediately. Her tone shifted again back to professional precise. Do you have any evidence, she asked. Not yet, I admitted, but I can get it. She nodded. Good. Photos of the missing items. Any communication where she discusses your assets. Witness statements if possible. Ethan, I said softly. He saw something, I'm sure of it. Then we'll need to approach that carefully, Patricia said. He's a minor, but his testimony could be important. I nodded. What about the jewelry, I asked. Can I get it back, possibly, she said. But that's secondary right now. Secondary. The word stung more than I expected. Those pieces, they weren't just things. But she was right. This isn't about the jewelry anymore, I said quietly. No, Patricia agreed. It's about intent. I looked up at her. And what happens if we prove it, I asked. Her expression didn't soften. If we establish that Heather acted in bad faith through theft, deception, or coercion, then the trust activates as written, and she loses everything I said. Yes, the finality of it settled into my chest like a weight. My daughter, my only child, gone from Robert's legacy, by her own actions. I didn't want it to come to this, I whispered. I know, Patricia said gently, but this isn't something you caused. I nodded, but the ache didn't ease. Because even if I hadn't caused it, I still had to face it. I stood slowly gathering the papers Patricia handed me. What do I do now, I asked. She met my eyes, her voice steady. You go home, she said, and you don't confront her. I nodded. Not yet. Let her believe she's in control. Patricia continued. People reveal the most when they think they've already won. A cold clarity settled over me. I can do that, I said. I know you can, she replied. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Patricia, I said softly. She looked up. Robert, did he think this would happen? She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, he hoped it wouldn't, she said. But he loved you enough to be prepared if it did. I nodded once. Then I walked out of that office, the weight of truth heavier than anything I had carried before, but also stronger. Because for the first time since I opened that empty jewelry chest, I wasn't just reacting. I was ready. And whatever Heather thought she had taken from me, she had no idea what she had just set in motion. By the time I drove back home, the late afternoon sun had begun to settle low over Savannah, casting long golden shadows across the streets. Everything looked the same. That was the strange part. The same houses, the same sidewalks, the same slow-moving traffic and quiet corners, and yet I felt like I was returning to a different place entirely, because now I knew what I was standing inside. Not just a home, a situation, a carefully unfolding truth that had been set in motion long before I ever noticed that jewelry chest had shifted on my dresser. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. This was the line, the invisible one, before I was a mother trying to understand her daughter. Now, I was a woman protecting herself from someone who happened to be her daughter. That difference mattered, more than I wanted it to. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, forcing my shoulders to relax, my expression to soften. If Heather was watching, and I was beginning to assume she always was, I needed to look exactly like the version of me she expected. A little slower, a little more uncertain, a little less aware. When I stepped inside, the house greeted me with the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and something faintly sweet vanilla, maybe. Heather had always liked to make a space feel put together when she thought it mattered. "Mom," her voice called from the living room. "That you?" "Yes," I replied, setting my purse down by the door. "Just got back." She appeared a moment later, her smile already in place. "How were your errands?" she asked. "Fine," I said lightly. "Nothing exciting." She studied me just for a second too long. "Did you go anywhere specific?" she asked casually. There it was. The probing, careful, controlled. "No," I said with a small shrug. "Just drove around a bit. Needed some air." She nodded slowly, but I could see it. She was measuring my answer, looking for something. A crack, a hesitation. I gave her none. "Well," she said, smoothing her hands over her jeans, "I made some tea." "You should sit down." I smiled faintly. "That sounds nice." We moved into the kitchen together, the space feeling both familiar and strangely staged, like a set designed to look like a home but missing something essential. Trust, maybe. I sat down at the table while she poured the tea, her movements precise, almost too deliberate. You've seemed tired lately, she said, setting the cup in front of me. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the warmth settle into my fingers. I suppose I have, I replied. You shouldn't be doing everything on your own, she continued. It's not safe. There it was again. That word, safe. I've managed this long, I said gently. Yes, but things change, she insisted. People need help. I looked up at her, then meeting her eyes fully. I agree, I said quietly. Something in my tone made her pause. Just for a moment, then she smiled again. I'm glad she said, because I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we start making some decisions together. Together. The word felt hollow. What kind of decisions, I asked. She hesitated as if choosing her next words carefully. About the house, she said finally. About your finances. Just getting everything organized. I took a slow sip of tea. That sounds like a big conversation, I said. It doesn't have to be, she replied quickly. We can keep it simple. I just want to make sure everything is secure. Secure. Another word that didn't mean what she wanted it to mean. I appreciate that, I said softly, but I'm not sure I'm ready to make any big changes. Her expression tightened. Mom, she said, her voice sharpening just slightly, this isn't about being ready. It's about being responsible. There it was. The shift. Small but unmistakable. I am being responsible, I said calmly. No, she countered, you're avoiding it. And that's dangerous. Dangerous. I set my cup down carefully. What exactly do you think is dangerous, Heather, I asked. She blinked, caught off guard by the directness. Well, she started, then recovered. You're getting older. Things can happen. I'm aware of my age, I said evenly. That's not what I meant, she said quickly. If something were to happen to you, everything would be a mess. The house, the accounts, everything. And you think you can prevent that. I asked. Yes, she said firmly. If we plan ahead. I held her gaze for a long moment. You've given this a lot of thought, I said. She didn't answer right away. Then I have to, she said quietly, because you haven't. The accusation hung in the air between us, but I didn't react. Not the way she expected. Instead, I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting a small, almost tired smile touch my lips. Maybe you're right, I said softly. Her eyes flickered. Surprise, relief, opportunity. Really, she asked. I nodded. Maybe I have been putting things off, I continued. Maybe it's time I started thinking about the future. She straightened slightly, her posture shifting. That's all I'm saying, she said quickly. We just need to get things in order. I nodded again slowly. We can talk about it, I said. Her smile widened just enough to reveal what she was really feeling. Victory. Or at least, the beginning of it. Good, she said. I actually have a few ideas already. Of course she did. I'm sure you do, I replied. We sat there for a moment, the conversation settling into something quieter. But underneath it, something was building. Because now I knew what she believed. She thought the note gave her leverage. She thought it proved something. She thought she was one step ahead, but she wasn't. Not even close. Later that evening, after dinner, I found myself standing in the hallway outside Ethan's room. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling through the crack. I hesitated. Then I knocked softly. Ethan, I called gently. Yeah, his voice came from inside. Can I come in? There was a brief pause. Then okay. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. He was sitting on his bed, his phone in his hands, but he set it aside when he saw me. What's up? He asked. I smiled softly, moving to sit in the chair by his desk. Just wanted to check on you, I said. You've been quiet today. He shrugged. Just tired, he said. I studied him for a moment. 16 years old, still a boy in so many ways, but old enough to carry things he shouldn't have to, Ethan. I said gently. Can I ask you something? He hesitated. Okay. Did you hear anything the other night? I asked. When I was sleeping, his eyes dropped immediately. To the floor, to his hands, anywhere but me. That was my answer, but I waited. Because sometimes silence tells you more than words. I don't know, he said finally. No, I didn't push. Not yet. That's okay, I said softly. You don't have to answer right now. He nodded, but his shoulders remained tense. I just want you to know something, I added. He looked up, then cautiously. "You can always tell me the truth," I said, "no matter what it is." Something shifted in his expression. Guilt, fear, and something else. Relief, maybe. "Okay," he said quietly. I smiled gently. "Get some rest," I said, standing up. "We'll talk later." As I left the room and closed the door behind me, I felt it again. That clarity, that certainty. Heather wasn't just moving forward with her plan. She was accelerating. And Ethan was caught in the middle of it, which meant I didn't just have to protect myself anymore. I had to protect him too. And whatever my daughter thought she was building, I was about to make sure it collapsed before it could take anything else with it. The next morning, I woke before anyone else. Not because I had to, but because something inside me refused to let me sleep the way I had before. The house was quiet, truly quiet this time. No television humming, no footsteps overhead, no soft clink of dishes in the kitchen. Just the low, familiar creak of old wood settling into itself as if even the house was holding its breath. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long moment, my hands resting on my knees, staring at the jewelry chest. Closed, still, but no longer whole. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. I already knew what was missing. Instead, I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside just enough to let the pale morning light spill in. 3 years ago, this house felt like a place I had to hold together. Now I understood something else. It wasn't the house that needed protection. It was me. And the truth. By the time Heather came downstairs, I was already in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in my hand, sitting calmly at the table, like I had nothing in the world to worry about. "Morning," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Good morning," I replied. She hesitated in the doorway, studying me. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," I answered lightly. That seemed to satisfy her, or at least it gave her something she could interpret the way she wanted. "Did you take another pill?" she asked, moving toward the counter. I shook my head. "No," I said simply. "I don't think I will again." A small pause. "Oh," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Well, they helped last time. They helped me sleep," I said, "that's all." She didn't respond. Instead, she busied herself with making coffee, her movements slightly quicker than usual. Watching her now, I could see it more clearly. The tension underneath the surface. The way she was holding herself together, not out of calm, but out of control. Because she thought she was close. And when people think they're close to getting what they want, they stop being careful. That was what Patricia meant. Let her believe she's in control. Let her reveal herself. Mom, Heather said, suddenly turning toward me. I was thinking about what we talked about yesterday. I looked up. Yes. About getting things organized, she continued. I think we should start sooner rather than later. Of course you do, I thought. Aloud, I simply nodded. What did you have in mind? She stepped closer, leaning lightly against the counter. Well, I've been doing some research, she said. There are ways to simplify everything. Make sure the house and your accounts are easier to manage, for who I asked gently. She blinked. For you, she said quickly, and for me, I mean, in case anything happens. There it was again, the assumption, the quiet insertion of herself into decisions that weren't hers to make. I said. And I found someone who can help, she added. A notary. Really efficient. He can come by the house so you don't have to go anywhere. I let that sit for a moment. A notary, I repeated. Yes, she said, nodding eagerly. Just to make things official. Nothing complicated. Nothing complicated. I almost smiled. Maybe I said slowly, but I think I'd prefer to take my time. Her expression tightened. Mom time is exactly what we don't have, she said, a hint of impatience slipping through. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Is that so? She hesitated. Then I just don't want things to get messy, she said, that's all. I nodded, as if considering it. We'll talk about it, I said. Not yes, not no, just enough to keep her moving. Because the more she pushed, the more she revealed. Later that morning, after Heather left to run errands, I heard Ethan moving quietly upstairs. I waited a few minutes before calling out. Ethan, a pause, then footsteps. He appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression cautious. Yeah. Can you come down for a minute? I asked gently. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay. He came into the kitchen slowly, his shoulders slightly hunched, like he was bracing for something he didn't fully understand. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit with me for a second." He sat, but he didn't relax. "Ethan," I said softly, "I need to ask you something again." His eyes dropped immediately. I waited. "I'm not here to get you in trouble," I continued, "and I'm not here to make you choose sides." His hands tightened in his lap. "I just need the truth," I said. The silence stretched, long enough to feel heavy. "Then I saw her," he said quietly. My chest tightened, but I didn't move. "Saw who?" I asked gently. "Mommy said, that night." I nodded slowly. "What did you see?" He swallowed. "She went into your room," he said, "after you went to sleep." My heart sank, but it didn't surprise me. "What was she doing?" I asked. He hesitated again. "Taking things," he said finally. The words landed softly, but they echoed. "Did she say anything?" I asked. He nodded. "On the phone," he said. "She was talking to Caleb." "Of course." "What did she say?" Ethan looked up at me, then his eyes filled with something deeper than fear. "Guilt," she said. "If the note said what they thought, they wouldn't have to worry anymore," he said. The same words. Almost exactly. "Did she mention the house?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "She said something about it being yours, but not for long." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, not in shock, in confirmation. When I opened them again, I felt something different. Not just clarity. Resolve, Ethan. I said gently, "Thank you for telling me." He shook his head quickly. "I should have stopped her," he said. "I knew it was wrong." "No," I said firmly. He looked up surprised. "That's not your responsibility," I continued. "You're not the one who did something wrong." His expression wavered. "But I didn't say anything," he whispered. "You're saying something now," I said softly. "And that matters." He swallowed his shoulders, relaxing just slightly. "What's going to happen?" he asked. The question lingered in the air. Honest, heavy. I thought about everything Patricia had said, about the trust, the conditions, the consequences. And then I looked at him. 16 years old, caught in something he didn't create. "You're going to be okay," I said gently. He nodded, but I could tell that wasn't what he meant. "Is Mom in trouble?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, because the truth wasn't simple and it wasn't kind. She made some choices, I said carefully, and those choices have consequences. He looked down again. "Is she going to lose everything?" he asked quietly. The question hit harder than I expected, because he already understood. More than she did. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, but inside, I did. Because Heather hadn't just crossed a line. She had stepped directly into something designed to reveal exactly who she was. And now, there was no turning back. As Ethan stood up to leave, he paused at the doorway. "Grandma," he said. "Yes, I didn't tell her I saw anything," he said. I nodded. That was probably wise. He hesitated. "Are you going to tell her you know?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "Not yet." He nodded, then disappeared upstairs. And as I sat there alone in the kitchen once more, the quiet settling back around me, I realized something with absolute certainty. Heather believed she was running out of time, that she needed to act quickly, that she was close to securing everything she thought she deserved. But in reality, she was running straight toward the moment that would take it all away. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be chaotic, it would be precise, deliberate, and final, just the way Robert had planned. By the end of that week, I had become someone my daughter no longer recognized. Not because I had changed into something new, but because I had stopped pretending to be what she wanted me to be. Frailer, more confused, easier to guide, easier to control. Instead, I became quieter, more observant, and far more deliberate. I began with small things. Simple, quiet documentation, just as Patricia had advised. The jewelry chest. I took photographs of it exactly as it was. The empty velvet slots, the slight indentations where pieces had rested for decades. I didn't rush. I adjusted the angle, made sure the lighting was clear. Each image felt like a record of something more than missing objects. Proof. Then I went through my phone. Messages, calls, Anything Heather had said that hinted at urgency, pressure, or intent. At first, there wasn't much. Heather was careful, too careful to put anything obvious in writing. But patterns emerged. Repeated mentions of getting things in order, subtle nudges about not waiting too long, a message from 2 nights before Heather. We really need to talk about the house soon. It's important. At the time, I had responded with a simple, "We'll see." Now it read differently, more like a timeline, more like a countdown. I took screenshots, saved everything. Then I moved on to something harder, audio. That part required patience and proximity. That night after dinner, I made sure to leave my phone on the kitchen counter screen, dark recording quietly while I excused myself to rest. I didn't go far, just enough to be out of sight, close enough to hear. At first there was nothing, just the sound of dishes being moved, and water running, the low hum of the refrigerator. Then, Heather's voice, soft, careful. "She's starting to ask questions," she said. A pause. Caleb's voice followed lower, sharper. "Then you need to move faster." My breath stilled. "I know," Heather replied, "but I can't push too hard. She'll get suspicious?" "She already is," Caleb said. "You said she asked about the jewelry." My fingers tightened slightly against the wall. "She doesn't know anything," Heather insisted. "She's just noticing things." "Noticing leads to questions," he said. "Questions lead to problems." A pause. "Then did you find it?" Caleb asked. My heart stopped for just a second. Heather hesitated. "I found something," she said, "but I don't think it's everything." "What does it say?" he pressed. Another pause. "It mentions a lawyer," she said, "and something about documents. I think there's more somewhere else." "Of course you do," I thought, "because you're looking for the wrong thing. So find it," Caleb said. "Whatever it is, it's got to be tied to the house." "Why else would he hide it?" "Exactly," Heather replied. "That's what I'm saying." My chest tightened. Not from surprise, from the clarity of it. They weren't guessing anymore. They were building a plan, a wrong one. "But we don't have time to dig around forever," Caleb continued. "You need leverage, something you can use now." "I have leverage," Heather said. "How a beat." "She trusts me," Heather replied. The words landed harder than anything else. "She's already agreeing to talk about the house," she added. "I just need to get her to sign." "And you think she will?" Caleb asked. "I'll make sure she does," Heather said quietly. Silence followed, heavy. Then Caleb spoke again. "Good," he said, "because once that's done, everything else is just paperwork." Paperwork. As if my life could be reduced to that. As if my home, my memories, my husband's careful planning could be signed away with a pen and a lie. The recording continued for a few more minutes, but nothing else mattered as much as that. I stepped back silently, my heart steady now in a way that surprised me. Not racing, not panicking, just clear. Because now I didn't just have suspicion, I had evidence. And more importantly, I had timing. The next morning, Heather was different again. Softer, warmer, more attentive. She made breakfast without being asked if I needed anything from the store. Sat with me longer than usual, her voice gentle. Her smile carefully placed. If I didn't know better, I might have believed it. "Mom," she said at one point, reaching across the table to touch my hand, "I've been thinking about us." I looked up at her. "Yes, I don't want things to get complicated," she continued. "I just want to make sure everything is taken care of." There it was again. That phrase, taken care of. "I understand," I said softly. Her fingers tightened slightly around mine. "Do you trust me?" she asked. The question came suddenly, directly, and for a moment, it almost took my breath away. Because there was a time when that answer would have been immediate, unquestioned. Yes, always yes. But that time was gone. Still, I smiled, a small, tired smile. "Of course I trust you," I said. The lie sat quietly between us, and she accepted it without hesitation, because she needed to, because her entire plan depended on it. Relief softened her expression. "Good," she said, "because I've scheduled someone to come by this weekend, just to go over a few things. Nothing serious. A notary." "Of course." I nodded slowly. "That sounds fine," I said. Her eyes lit up just slightly. Victory again, or what she believed was victory. "We can do it over dinner," she added. "Make it easy, comfortable, comfortable." I almost laughed. That would be nice, I said. And in that moment, everything aligned, the timing, the evidence, the truth. She thought she was setting the stage, but she wasn't. She was walking directly into it. Later that day, I called Patricia again. I have what we need, I said simply. There was no hesitation on her end. Good, she replied. Then it's time. I told her about the dinner, about the notary, about the papers Heather was preparing. Patricia listened carefully. Then invite me, she said. I paused. As what I asked. A witness, she replied. Or better yet, a surprise. A slow, steady calm settled over me. Yes, I said, because this wasn't just about stopping Heather anymore. It was about revealing the truth, fully, publicly, in a way she couldn't twist or escape, and if she wanted to make it official, then so would I. That evening, as I sat alone in my bedroom, the jewelry chest resting quietly on the dresser once more, I realized something that felt almost like closure. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Heather hadn't just made a mistake. She had made a series of choices, each one leading her further down a path she believed would end in security, in control, in ownership. But what she didn't understand was that she had already crossed the line that would take all of that away. And now, all that was left was for her to realize it. The morning of the dinner arrived with a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Savannah was never truly quiet. Not completely. There was always something, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the faint call of birds threading through the air. But that morning, everything seemed paused, as if the world itself was waiting. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately, as I had trained myself to do over the past week. Every action measured, every expression controlled. I dressed with care, choosing a soft cream blouse and a navy skirt. Nothing too formal, nothing too casual, just enough to look like myself, or at least the version of myself Heather still believed in. Downstairs, I could hear her already. Cabinet doors opening and closing, the sharp clink of dishes being set out, the low murmur of her voice as she spoke on the phone. She'll sign, she said, her tone hushed but firm. I've already laid the groundwork. A pause. Yes, tonight, she added. Another pause. No, she won't suspect anything. I stood at the top of the stairs listening, not with anger, not even with surprise, just acknowledgement. Then I descended each step, quiet but intentional. Heather turned when she heard me, her smile appearing almost instantly. Good morning, she said brightly. You're up early. I couldn't sleep, I replied. She nodded as if that fit neatly into the version of me she had constructed. Well, that's okay, she said. We have a busy day. Do we? I asked lightly. She laughed softly. Just getting everything ready. I want tonight to go smoothly. So do I thought. Can I help? I offered. Her eyes flickered just briefly. No, she said quickly. You should rest. I've got it under control. Of course you do. I smiled faintly and moved past her into the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee. The air smelled faintly of garlic and herbs. She had already started preparing dinner. Effort, care, presentation. It would have been touching, if it hadn't been strategic. Who's coming tonight again? I asked casually. She hesitated. Just a few people, she said. The notary, of course. And I thought it might be nice to invite Aunt Carol. You know, make it feel more like a family thing. I nodded slowly. That sounds lovely. She relaxed slightly. And maybe a couple of neighbors, she added, just to keep things comfortable. Comfortable. The word echoed again, but I didn't challenge it, because I had already made my own arrangements. Later that afternoon, while Heather was out picking up a few last-minute items, I sat down with Ethan in the living room. He looked nervous. More than usual. You don't have to stay for dinner if you don't want to, I told him gently. He shook his head. I want to, he said. I studied him for a moment. Are you sure? He nodded again, more firmly this time. I think I should be there, he said. Something in his voice told me this wasn't just about curiosity. It was about responsibility and maybe redemption. I reached over and placed my hand lightly on his. Okay, I said softly. He looked at me, his expression uncertain. What's going to happen tonight? He asked. I considered the question carefully. The truth, I said. He swallowed. "Is Mom going to be okay?" he asked. There it was again. That quiet, persistent concern. Not for himself, for her. Even after everything. "I don't know," I said honestly. He nodded, but I could see the weight of it settling in his shoulders. "I just don't want things to get worse," he whispered. I squeezed his hand gently. "Sometimes I said things have to get worse before they can get better." He didn't respond, but he didn't pull away either, and for now, that was enough. By early evening, the house had transformed. The dining table was set with care plates aligned perfectly, glasses polished to a shine, candles placed just so their soft light adding a warmth that felt almost convincing. Almost. Heather moved through the space with purpose, adjusting, checking, refining. She looked proud, like someone preparing for a moment they had worked toward. "Everything looks beautiful," I said as I stepped into the room. She turned her face, lighting up. "Thank you," she said. "I wanted it to feel special." Special. "Yes," I said quietly, "it does." The first guests arrived just after 6. Aunt Carol, just as Heather had mentioned. A couple from down the street I barely knew. And then, the notary. A man in his 50s dressed in a suit that tried a little too hard to look professional. His handshake was firm, but his eyes moved too quickly. Taking in details, calculating. "Mrs. Bryant," he said, nodding politely. "Pleasure to meet you." "You as well," I replied. Heather hovered nearby, her smile unwavering. "Thank you so much for coming," she said to him. "We really appreciate it." "Of course," he said, "happy to help." Help. I almost wondered if he knew what kind. Dinner began as smoothly as Heather had planned. Conversation flowed, laughter light and practiced. Stories, shared questions asked, everything carefully balanced to create the illusion of normalcy. But underneath it, the tension built. I could feel it in the way Heather kept glancing at the clock, in the way the notary's briefcase sat unopened beside his chair, in the way Ethan barely touched his food, his eyes flicking between us, waiting. We all were. Finally, as the plates were cleared and the last of the wine was poured, Heather stood. Well, she said, her voice bright but carrying an edge. "Before we get too late, I thought we could take care of a few things." There it was, the moment. She moved to the sideboard and picked up a folder. Thin, simple, but heavy with intent. "Mom," she said, turning toward me, "this is just some basic paperwork. Nothing complicated, just to make sure everything is in order." I looked at her, really looked at her. And for a moment, I saw her as she had been, a little girl in the kitchen asking questions about the world. And then I saw her as she was now, a woman standing across from me holding out documents she believed would give her control over everything I had left. "Of course," I said softly. Her relief was immediate. She stepped closer, placing the folder in front of me, opening it to the first page. "Just sign here," she said, pointing. The notary shifted in his seat, preparing himself. The room grew quieter, heavier, and then I reached for the pen, slowly, deliberately, my fingers closing around it with just enough hesitation to make it believable. Heather leaned in slightly, her breath almost catching. This was it. The moment she thought she had been working toward, the moment she believed would secure everything. But as I looked down at the paper, I didn't sign. Instead, I lifted my eyes and met hers. "Before I do that," I said calmly, "I think we should invite one more person to join us." The room stilled. Heather blinked. What she asked. I smiled faintly. "She's already here," I said, "and right on cue." There was a knock at the door. The knock at the door didn't sound loud, but in that moment, it might as well have been thunder. Every head in the room turned instinctively toward the hallway. Even the notary straightened slightly in his chair, his briefcase suddenly forgotten. The quiet hum of conversation that had been carefully built over dinner collapsed instantly into silence. Heather was the first to react. "That must be Carol," she said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite land. I invited her a little late, but her voice had changed, just slightly, a fraction tighter than before. I didn't respond. I simply stood there, my hand still resting near the folder she had placed in front of me, the pen untouched beside it. Another knock, this time firmer, more deliberate. "I'll get it," Heather said too quickly, but I raised my hand gently. "I will," I said. She hesitated, just long enough for something uncomfortable to pass between us. Then I walked. Each step through the hallway felt slower than it should have, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted every second of this moment to exist fully in my memory. When I reached the door, I paused, not for hesitation, for control. Then I opened it, and Patricia Langford stood there, dressed in a dark tailored suit, calm as always, holding a slim leather folder against her chest, like it belonged there more than anywhere else in the world. Behind her stood someone else, a younger man in a simple blazer holding a small recorder. Heather's face, when she saw Patricia, changed instantly. Not confusion, recognition, and then something sharper. "What is this?" Heather asked, stepping forward into the hallway. Patricia smiled politely. "Good evening, Heather," she said calmly. "May we come in?" No, Heather replied immediately, her voice rising slightly. "This is a private family matter." Patricia didn't move. "Actually," she said evenly, "it's a legal matter now." The room behind us had gone completely silent. I could feel them watching, every guest, every breath held. I stepped aside. "Please," I said softly. Patricia entered first, then the young man followed. Heather's eyes darted between them, her composure beginning to fracture in small, almost invisible ways. "What is this about?" she demanded, again turning toward me now. Mom, I didn't answer her immediately. Instead, I closed the door. Not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly. The sound of the latch clicking into place seemed to settle something in the air. Then I walked back into the dining room. Patricia followed, and so did the young man with the recorder. The notary stood halfway unsure now. "Excuse me," he said cautiously. "I wasn't informed there would be additional parties." "There are no additional parties," Patricia interrupted gently. "Just relevant ones." She placed her folder on the table, then looked at Heather. "I believe," Patricia continued calmly, "you were about to execute certain documents regarding Mrs. Bryant's property and assets." Heather's smile returned, but thinner now. "Yes," she said quickly, "just standard planning documents, nothing urgent." Patricia nodded. "Of course," she said. "Then you won't mind if I review them." The notary shifted uncomfortably. My client is Mrs. Collins," he said, glancing at Heather. "Correct," Patricia replied, "and my client is Mrs. Bryant." She turned slightly toward me, and I believe she added, "We are dealing with overlapping claims that require clarification before any signature is made." Heather laughed lightly. "There are no overlapping claims," she said. "This is my mother. We're just organizing things." Patricia opened her folder. "Then you won't object to reviewing the estate structure of Robert Bryant," she said. The name changed the temperature of the room. I saw it immediately in Heather's face. That flicker, that tightening around the eyes. "What does my father have to do with this?" she asked sharply. Patricia didn't answer her right away. Instead, she placed a document on the table. A trust agreement. Stamped, signed, official. Heather stared at it, then at me. "What is this?" she asked again, but quieter now. Patricia spoke before I could. "This," she said, "is a conditional trust established by your father 6 years prior to his passing." The room shifted. Even the guests leaned slightly forward now. Heather let out a short laugh. "That's ridiculous," she said. "My father would never, he didn't have any reason to do something like that." Patricia nodded. "He did," she said simply, "and he was very specific about the conditions." She turned the page. Condition 1. She read, "No coercion or manipulation of the surviving spouse." Heather's smile faltered. Condition 2. "No unauthorized access or transfer of personal property belonging to Mrs. Bryant." A pause. Condition 3. "No attempts to induce legal or financial decisions under misleading circumstances." The silence in the room became absolute. I watched Heather's face carefully now. The mask wasn't holding, not anymore. "That's not what this is," Heather said quickly. "She's confused. She doesn't understand what's happening." Patricia looked at her directly. "Then let's clarify something," she said calmly. "Did you or did you not remove jewelry from your mother's possession while she was under the influence of medication?" The question landed like a strike. Heather froze. For half a second, maybe less. But it was enough. "That's not," she started. The young man with the recorder stepped slightly forward, and Heather stopped. Because she saw it then. The recording device. And did you subsequently sell those items for financial gain? Patricia continued. Heather's breathing changed. Mom, she said suddenly, turning to me, tell her this is insane. I met her eyes, and for the first time, I didn't soften. I think I said quietly, you should answer the question. Something broke in her expression then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. I needed help, she said sharply. We were drowning in bills. Caleb Turner, Patricia interrupted. Heather hesitated again. The name had weight now, real weight. Patricia opened another document. He's also under investigation for fraudulent financial activity in 3 states, she said calmly. Heather stepped back slightly. That has nothing to do with this, she said quickly. It does, Patricia replied, because it establishes intent. The word hung in the air. Intent. Heather turned to me again. Her voice lowered now. Mom, please, she said, don't let them do this. There it was. The shift. The return to something softer. Something familiar. Something that used to work. But I didn't move. Because I had already heard everything I needed to hear. Patricia turned another page, and regarding the blue velvet box, she said carefully, you were searching for a document you believed granted you ownership of this property. Heather stiffened. You told me there was something there, she said suddenly, her voice cracking slightly now. You made it sound like I made nothing sound like anything. Patricia interrupted. Silence again, thicker now, heavier. Then Patricia looked at her directly. Your father left no transfer of ownership to you, she said firmly. Only a conditional structure that required trust. A pause. And you failed that condition the moment you took what did not belong to you. Heather shook her head slowly. No, she whispered. That's not possible. But even as she said it, I saw it. The realization, slow, reluctant, devastating. She turned toward me one last time, and for the first time that night, she wasn't angry. She wasn't confident. She wasn't calculating. She was lost. Mom, she said quietly, and I finally spoke, not with anger, not with triumph, just truth. You didn't misunderstand the note, I said softly. You misunderstood your father. The room stayed silent. Even the air felt still. And in that silence, everything she had built started to collapse. For a few seconds after I spoke, no one moved. It was as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Heather stood in the center of it all, frozen between disbelief and something far more dangerous, realization that couldn't be reversed once it arrived. Her eyes kept shifting between me, Patricia, and the document spread across the table, as though somewhere in the chaos there might still be a version of the truth she could grab onto and rebuild. But there wasn't. Patricia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Mrs. Collins, she said calmly, please sit down. Heather ignored her. Mom, she said again, her voice cracking now, thinner than before. Tell them this is not what Dad meant. You know it's not. I looked at her. Really looked at her. For a moment, I saw not the woman standing in front of me now, but the child she used to be. Bare feet on the kitchen floor, laughing too loudly at things that didn't matter. Falling asleep on the couch with a book still open on her chest. That version of her felt like another lifetime. I told you the truth, I said quietly. You just didn't want to hear it. Her face tightened. No, she said sharply. No, this is wrong. You set this up. You, Patricia interrupted her gently. Your father set it up, she corrected. Years before any of this happened. He anticipated financial pressure, emotional manipulation, and the possibility that someone close to Mrs. Bryant might attempt to exploit her. Heather let out a short, disbelieving laugh. That's insane, she said. He would never think that about me. But even as she said it, her voice wasn't as strong anymore. Patricia opened another folder and placed a second document on the table. This is an affidavit from your father's legal review, she said. Signed and witnessed. It outlines his concerns regarding coercive financial behavior. Heather stared at it without touching it. Then her eyes flicked toward me again. You knew, she said slowly. You knew all of this, and you let me humiliate myself. I didn't respond immediately, because that wasn't the truth. Not fully. I didn't know everything I said quietly, not until recently, a pause. But I knew enough, I added. Her breathing became uneven. Enough to what she asked. Enough to wait, I said. That word hit harder than anything Patricia had said. Wait, Heather shook her head. No, she whispered. No, you're lying. You're trying to make me look like I'm some kind of criminal. The notary shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I think I should step away from this, he muttered, already gathering his briefcase. Patricia didn't stop him. She didn't need to. Because this wasn't about him anymore. Heather turned suddenly, grabbing the edge of the table. This is my house too, she said loudly. I grew up here. I have rights. Patricia nodded calmly. You have memories here, she said, not rights to ownership. The distinction landed like a final nail. Heather's eyes filled not with tears yet, but with something sharper. Panic, then anger. You're doing this because of him, she said suddenly, pointing at Patricia. Because of some document he wrote when he wasn't thinking clearly. You think you can take everything away from me because of a piece of paper. Patricia's voice softened slightly, but only slightly. This is not about one document, she said. It is about a pattern of behavior you chose. Heather turned to me again, desperate now. Mom, please, she said, stepping closer. You don't have to do this. We can fix this. I'll give everything back. I'll stop, I said quietly. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through the room immediately. She froze. I stood slowly. And for the first time that evening, I walked closer to her instead of away. I waited. I said my voice steady because I needed to understand whether you were desperate or deliberate. Her lips parted slightly, and now I know I continued. Her eyes searched my face. Know what she asked? I didn't look away. That you weren't confused, I said. You were convinced. A silence followed, heavy, unforgiving. Behind her, Ethan stood near the doorway. I hadn't noticed him there before. He looked pale, smaller than usual, like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed to exist in this moment. Ethan, I said softly. He flinched slightly, then looked at me. Come here, I said gently. He hesitated, then slowly moved forward. Heather turned sharply. No, she said. No, don't involve him in this. But Ethan kept walking. Not toward her, toward me. He stopped beside my chair, his eyes lowered. I asked him questions earlier, I said, calmly, still looking at Heather. And he told me the truth. Heather's face drained of color. What did you tell her? She demanded. Ethan swallowed hard. I saw you, he said quietly. With the boxes. Heather shook her head immediately. No, you don't understand. I saw you take them. He repeated, voice trembling but steadying as he spoke, while she was sleeping. The room fell into a deeper silence than before. Even the guests didn't move now. Heather stared at him, then at me, then back again. You're lying, she said weakly, but even she didn't believe it anymore. Patricia stepped forward slightly. This is now a matter of record, she said. We have testimony, documentation, and financial tracing of the sold assets. Heather's hands dropped slowly from the table, like something inside her had finally given up holding itself together. I didn't want it to be like this, she said almost to herself. No one responded, because that wasn't the point anymore. She looked at me one last time, and this time, there was no anger left in her eyes. Only something broken. Why didn't you just help me? She asked quietly. The question hung there, raw, human, and painfully late, and I felt something tighten in my chest. Not guilt, not regret, but sorrow for what could have been different long before this moment. I tried, I said softly, and that was the truth. A truth she wasn't ready to hear when it mattered. Patricia closed the folder. Mrs. Collins, she said formally, you are no longer authorized to make any claims or decisions regarding Mrs. Bryant's property or estate. Heather didn't respond, she just stood there, still, empty-handed, as everything she had been reaching for slipped out of her control completely. The notary was gone. The guests were silent. Caleb, wherever he was no longer part of this room. And the only thing left was consequence. Heather finally stepped back, slowly, like each movement cost her something she didn't have left to give. I see, she whispered. Then she turned toward the hallway and walked out. No shouting, no final argument, just the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall, until the house was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This quiet had weight, and after a long moment, Ethan exhaled shakily beside me. "It's over?" he asked softly. I looked at him, then at Patricia, and finally at the empty space where my daughter had stood. "Yes," I said quietly, but even as I said it, I knew. It wasn't really the end. It was just the moment everything finally became real. The house didn't feel like the same house after Heather left. Not because anything had physically changed. The furniture was still in place. The lights still hummed softly. The faint smell of dinner still lingered in the air. But something essential had shifted. It was as if the structure of the home had absorbed what had just happened and was now holding it quietly like a memory it didn't know how to release. No one spoke for a long time. Patricia was the first to move. She calmly gathered the remaining documents, organizing them with the kind of precision that made emotion feel almost unnecessary in her presence. "It's done," she said at last, her voice steady. I nodded slowly, but it didn't feel like done. It felt like the end of something irreversible. Ethan was still standing beside me. His hands were clenched loosely at his sides, like he wasn't sure what to do with them now that everything had stopped moving. "Can I go upstairs?" he asked quietly. I looked at him. "Yes," I said gently, "of course." He hesitated, then added, "I didn't want it to happen like that." I know I said softly. That was all he needed. He walked away, slowly, each step careful, as if the house might still change its mind and call him back. When he was gone, Patricia closed her folder completely. "Mrs. Bryant," she said, her tone softer. "Now there are a few formalities we need to finalize, but legally speaking, the trust has already been executed." I exhaled slowly. "So it's over," I said again. Patricia studied me for a moment. Legally, she said, "Yes." The pause that followed carried more weight than her words, and personally, I asked. She didn't answer immediately, because there was no clean answer to that question. Finally, she said, "That part will take time." I nodded. Time. It always came down to that. She gathered her briefcase. "I'll leave you copies of everything she said. If Heather attempts any further contact regarding assets, refer her to me directly." I nodded again. "Thank you," I said quietly. Patricia paused at the door. Then unexpectedly, she softened just slightly. "Robert loved you," she said. "Everything he did was because of that." And then she was gone. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. And suddenly, I was alone. Completely. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the house breathe around me. It felt different now. Not empty, but exposed. Like every hidden corner had been opened and examined under harsh light. I walked slowly to the dining table. The remnants of dinner were still there, half-empty glasses, plates pushed aside, the faint imprint of a moment that had fractured everything it touched. I lowered myself into the chair Heather had been standing near. That chair now felt heavier than it should have, as if it still remembered her voice, her certainty, her collapse. I closed my eyes briefly, and for the first time that night, I let myself feel it. Not the anger, not the clarity, but the loss, because no matter what had been proven, no matter what she had done, she was still my daughter. And that truth did not disappear just because another truth replaced it. Footsteps creaked upstairs, Ethan, still here, still part of this house. I opened my eyes again, and in that moment, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about what remained after it. The next morning came too quietly. I woke early again, as I had every day since this began. But this time, there was no tension waiting for me in the hallway. No voice downstairs, no careful performance of normal life, just silence. Real silence. I made coffee and sat by the kitchen window, watching the light slowly spread across the yard. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt unfinished. Around mid-morning, my phone rang. I already knew before I looked at the screen. Heather. For a moment, I just stared at the name. Then I answered. "Mom." Her voice came immediately. Thin, controlled. Too controlled. We need to talk. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know about all of that, she said quickly. The trust, the conditions, none of it was explained to me properly. I listened, carefully. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she continued. We can fix this. I can fix this. Fix this. That word again, always the same instinct, to rebuild control instead of understanding consequence. You can't undo what happened last night, I said quietly. A pause. Then at least let's talk about Ethan, she said. He's going to be confused. He shouldn't be involved in this. He already is involved, I replied softly. He's a child, she insisted. He told the truth, I said. Silence again. Longer this time. Then her voice shifted. Lower. Less controlled. You're really going to choose him over me? She asked. The question landed differently than she intended. Because it wasn't about choosing. It was about recognizing what had already happened. I'm not choosing anyone, I said, a beat. I'm responding to what you chose. Another silence. Then I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, quieter now. For the first time, something in her voice sounded less rehearsed, more human. I know, I said, and I meant it, because that was the most complicated truth of all. Intent and consequence don't always match. I can come home, she said suddenly. We can talk properly. We can go through everything again. I closed my eyes for a moment. There's nothing left to go through, I said gently. A sharp inhale on the other end, then silence. Not angry this time, just hollow. I don't know what you want from me, she said finally, and that was the first honest thing she had said all night. I don't want anything from you, I replied. A pause. I just want the truth to stand. Another silence. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down slowly. My hands were steady, but my chest wasn't. That evening, Ethan came down for dinner. He moved more carefully than usual, as if the house itself might react differently to him now. Do you want me to leave? He asked quietly as he sat down. I looked at him. No, I said firmly. You stay. He nodded, but he didn't smile. We ate in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. Finally, he spoke. Is she going to come back? He asked. I thought about that, about Heather, about the call, about everything she had said. I don't know, I admitted. He nodded slowly. I don't want her to be gone forever, he said quietly. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. Neither do I said. And that was the truth that hurt the most, because justice had been served. Truth had been revealed. But family didn't end cleanly. It just changed shape. And sometimes, it stayed broken for a long time before it learned how to exist again. Outside, the evening settled gently over Savannah. And inside the house, for the first time in a long time, there was no more waiting, only the beginning of what came after. The days after Heather left didn't feel like recovery. They felt like aftermath. There is a difference. Recovery suggests healing in a straight line, forward, upward, improving. Aftermath is different. Aftermath is what remains when the emotional storm has already passed, but the air still smells like it. The house was quieter now, but not peaceful. Not yet. Every room still carried echoes of what had happened. Not sounds, exactly memories. The way Heather's voice had sharpened when she realized she was losing control. The way Ethan had gone silent afterward, sitting longer than usual at the dinner table, staring at food he barely touched. Even the smallest things felt changed. A chair slightly out of place, a cup left on the counter, a door that closed a little too softly. I moved through the house slowly each morning as if speed might disturb something fragile that was still settling. Ethan stayed. That was the one constant that grounded me. He didn't talk much at first. Not about Heather, not about that night. But he was there moving through his routines, going to school, coming home, existing in the space between silence and understanding. And I didn't push him, because I understood something now more clearly than I ever had before. Not all truth arrives in words. Some of it arrives in presence. 3 days after the confrontation, Patricia called, "Everything is formally executed," she said. "The trust has been activated exactly as written." I stood at the kitchen counter while she spoke, my hand resting lightly against the edge, as if I needed something physical to stay grounded. "So it's final," I said. "Yes," she replied. A pause. "There is no appeal under these conditions," she added gently. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. "I understand." "And Donna," she continued, her tone softening slightly, "Heather has not contacted me since." I didn't respond immediately. That didn't surprise me. "She may need time," Patricia said. "We all do," I replied quietly. After the call ended, I stood there for a long time staring out the kitchen window. The yard looked the same as it always had, but I didn't feel like the same person standing in it. That evening, Ethan came home later than usual. I noticed immediately. He walked into the kitchen quietly, his backpack still on his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Hey," I said gently, "everything okay?" He hesitated, then nodded, but not convincingly. "Ethan." I said more softly, "Come sit." He obeyed, slowly, carefully, like someone unsure whether the ground beneath him would hold. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he finally said it. "She called me." I froze slightly. When I asked, "Today," he said. I waited. "She said she didn't do what they're saying," he continued. "She said everything was twisted." I listened carefully. "She said she's going to fix it," he added. A pause. But she didn't sound sure. That last part mattered more than anything else he had said, because certainty had always been Heather's armor. And now, it was gone. "Did she ask you to do anything?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "No," he said quickly. "She just wanted me to know she's trying." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me," I said. He looked down at his hands. "Do you think she's lying?" he asked quietly. The question wasn't accusatory. It was uncertain, human. I took a breath before answering. "I think," I said carefully, "she believes her version of the truth." He frowned slightly. "But that doesn't make it true," he said. "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." Silence settled between us again. This one heavier than the others. Then Ethan looked up at me. "Are you scared she'll come back?" he asked. I considered the question honestly, not from fear, but from what return would mean. "I don't know what she'll do," I admitted, "but I don't think she's finished feeling this." He nodded slowly. "I don't want everything to get worse," he whispered. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his again. "It won't stay like this forever," I said, gently. But even as I said it, I knew better than to promise how. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. Not email, not text, a physical envelope, no return address. Just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in weeks. Heather. I held it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page. Short, carefully written, not dramatic, not pleading, controlled. "Mom," it began. "I don't expect you to believe me right now. Maybe you never will." I paused, reading slowly. "I've spent the last few days thinking about everything that happened, about what I did, about what I thought I was doing." My chest tightened slightly. I was wrong about the box. I stopped there for a moment. That line mattered, not because it excused anything, but because it acknowledged misunderstanding. She continued, "I thought I was finding something that gave me control over a situation I was scared of. I see now that I was just trying to force certainty where there wasn't any." I exhaled slowly. That was closer to truth than anything she had said before. "I don't know how to fix this," she wrote, "but I know I can't pretend it didn't happen." A pause. "Tell Ethan I'm sorry." I closed my eyes for a moment. That part was the hardest, because Ethan didn't just lose trust. He lost the illusion of safety in someone he loved. The letter ended simply, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I understand more now than I did then." No signature, just her name. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after reading it. The house was quiet again. Ethan was upstairs, and for the first time since everything began, I didn't feel like I was standing in the middle of a crisis anymore. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something unresolved. Later that night, I told Ethan about the letter. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back slightly in his chair. "So she knows she was wrong," he said slowly. "Yes," I replied. He nodded. "That doesn't fix it," he said. "No," I agreed again, "it doesn't." A long pause followed. Then he asked quietly, "Do you think she'll ever come back here?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't answer with certainty. I think I said carefully, "If she does, it will be different." He studied me for a moment. Different, how he asked. I hesitated, because I didn't fully know yet, but I understood enough. "Earned," I said finally. He nodded slowly as if accepting that as the only answer that made sense. That night, after Ethan went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet again, but not empty, not anymore. And as I looked around at everything that had survived this storm, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment just before the next version of it began. It took time before life began to feel like life again. Not the life I had before everything collapsed. Something different, quieter, more careful, more honest. The house in Savannah no longer felt like it was holding its breath, but it also no longer felt untouched. It had changed shape in ways that couldn't be repaired, only understood. Every room carried memory now, not just of loss, but of truth, finally spoken aloud. Heather did not return, not in person, not immediately. But she did not disappear either. Her presence came in fragments. A letter a few weeks later, shorter than the first, less defensive, more uncertain. No excuses this time, only reflection. She wrote about therapy, about Caleb being under investigation, about realizing how easily fear had turned into justification. I read it once. Then I placed it back in the envelope. I did not respond right away, because some responses cannot be rushed. Ethan, meanwhile, slowly began to breathe differently again. At first, I noticed the small things. He laughed once at something on television. Then again, a few days later, softer but real. He started eating dinner without staring into his plate as if expecting it to change. He began talking about school again, not as escape, but as direction. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, he surprised me. "I don't hate her," he said quietly. I looked at him. "I know," I replied gently. He hesitated. "I just don't understand her," he added. That I understood too, because understanding doesn't always come at the same speed as forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives later, or not at all. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "That's okay," I said softly. "You don't have to understand everything right now." He nodded. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't look weighed down by what he didn't understand. Months passed. The seasons shifted quietly in Savannah. The magnolia tree bloomed again as if nothing important had ever happened beneath its branches. The world continued its rhythm, indifferent to the human fractures inside it. But inside the house, we were rebuilding something different, not what was lost, something new. I began volunteering at a community center. Patricia introduced me to quiet work, mostly conversations with older women who had experienced financial manipulation, family pressure, or emotional dependency. I never used my own story as the center of anything. I didn't need to. They understood anyway. Pain has its own language, and recognition is often enough. One afternoon, I received another envelope. No return address again, but I knew before opening it. Heather. This time, the letter was different. Not shorter, not longer, just clearer. "Mom," it began. "I don't expect anything from you anymore. Not forgiveness, not answers, not even a response." I paused. "I'm not writing this to change what happened. I'm writing it because I finally understand that I can't." A long breath left my chest without me realizing I was holding it. "Therapy is helping," she continued. "It's not easy. Some days I don't recognize the way I thought about things before." I read slowly. "I know I hurt you. I know I hurt Ethan. I know I turned fear into something ugly." There was no defense in her words now, only acknowledgement. "I don't know who I will become after this, but I know I can't be who I was." At the bottom of the page, she wrote something that made my hands still for a moment. "If you ever decide I can see Ethan again, I will wait until you think it's right. Not when I want it, when it's safe for him. No demand, no pressure, just distance. Respect. Responsibility. I folded the letter slowly and set it on the table. Ethan came home that evening later than usual, carrying a stack of papers from school. He looked tired, but lighter than before. "Something came for you," I said gently. He paused, then sat down. I handed him the letter. He didn't open it immediately. He just looked at it, then at me. "Do you want me to read it?" he asked. I shook my head slightly. "It's your choice," I said. He nodded, then slowly opened it. He read in silence. No interruption, no reaction at first, just stillness. When he finished, he sat there for a long time without speaking. Then finally he said, "She sounds different." "Yes," I said. A pause. "Do you believe her?" he asked. That question was heavier than it seemed, because belief is not a single decision. It is a collection of smaller ones. "I believe she understands more than she did," I said, carefully. He nodded slowly. "Does that mean things can go back?" he asked. I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "They don't go back." He looked down. "Then what happens?" he asked. I thought about that for a long moment. About loss, about consequence, about the strange space between forgiveness and distance. Sometimes, I said quietly, they move forward differently. He didn't respond immediately, but he didn't look afraid anymore either. That was something. Another kind of progress. One evening, as the sun settled low over Savannah, I stood in front of the jewelry chest again. It still sat on the dresser, still closed, but no longer heavy in the same way. I opened it slowly. Inside, the remaining pieces were still there, fewer now, but not meaningless. They no longer felt like anchors to the past. They felt like markers of survival. I touched the empty space where the blue velvet box used to sit, and for the first time, I didn't feel loss. I felt understanding. That box had never been about jewelry. It had been about truth, and truth once revealed does not return to hiding. It simply changes the people who have seen it. Behind me, Ethan walked into the room quietly. "Are you okay?" he asked. I turned slightly and smiled, a real one this time. "Yes," I said softly. "I think I am." He nodded as if accepting that answer without needing more, and in that moment I understood something simple but final. Healing was not a return. It was not restoration. It was continuation, with scars, with memory, with boundaries that no longer needed to be explained. The house was no longer what it had been, neither were we, but we were still here, still standing, still moving forward, and somewhere beyond all of it. A daughter was learning slowly and painfully what it meant to lose something that could not be bought back. Not jewelry, not a house, but trust. And in that space between what was broken and what might one day be rebuilt, there was finally peace. Not perfect, not complete, but real and enough. What I learned through all of this is something I never expected to understand so late in my life. Love and access are not the same thing. Family and entitlement are not the same thing. And memory, no matter how deeply it lives in a house or in a piece of jewelry, cannot replace truth when truth is demanded. When we are older, people often assume we become fragile, easier to guide, easier to decide for, easier to overlook. But aging does not remove clarity, it sharpens it. What I lost was not just jewelry or even trust. What I lost was the illusion that love alone could protect me from harm within my own family. What I gained was boundaries I should have learned earlier. Boundaries are not punishment, they are protection. They are the quiet lines that separate care from control, concern from manipulation, help from harm. My daughter made choices in fear and desperation, and fear can convince people of almost anything if they are not careful. I don't excuse what she did, but I no longer see her as only the worst moment she ever created. She is still learning, just as I am still learning how to be a mother to someone I cannot fix. And Ethan, he reminded me that truth sometimes arrives through the most fragile voices, the ones who are caught in between, the ones who did not choose the storm but still stood inside it. If there is anything I want you to take from my story, it is this. Protect your peace without apology. Ask questions even when they hurt, and never confuse silence with safety. Because sometimes the people closest to you are not the ones who will harm you most. B.